The mop clattered against the marble floor, and Adiz went down hard, her knee cracking against stone polished so bright it threw back the ceiling lights like a mirror. For a moment nobody moved to help her. 3 women in silken heels stood over her, laughing, pointing, one of them still holding her coffee like the whole thing was a show put on for her entertainment. "Watch where you're mopping," one of them said, not even looking at Adiz, looking instead at her friends, waiting for them to laugh again. They did. A younger woman in a purple uniform dropped to her knees beside her, pulling Adiz's arm over her shoulder. "I've got you, Miss Grace. Lean on me." Grace, that was the name on Adiz's ID badge, the name she'd chosen for this job because it was common enough not to draw questions, pressed her palm flat against the cold floor and let the younger woman help her up. Her knee throbbed. Her pride throbbed worse. But she said nothing because saying something would mean explaining who she really was. And that was not something a 71-year-old woman playing a cleaning lady could afford to do. Not yet. The 3 women in silk walked off toward the elevators without another glance, still laughing about something else already, as if Grace had simply stopped existing the moment she was no longer amusing. The younger woman, whose badge read Ifioma, crouched to gather the mop and bucket. "Don't mind them," she said quietly. "They think because their fathers own stock in this building, the floor belongs to them too." Grace studied her for a moment. 28 maybe. Steady hands. She hadn't laughed. She hadn't looked away. She had simply knelt down on marble in a uniform that wasn't hers to ruin and helped a stranger up. "Thank you," Grace said, and meant it more than Ifioma could have known. 3 weeks earlier, Grace Adeyemi had been sitting in the dining room of a house so large that she and her son Emeka sometimes went entire days without crossing paths in it. She'd made him a plate of jollof rice out of habit, the way she'd done every Sunday since he was a boy, and set it across from her at the long table, knowing he would text an apology instead of showing up. He did. Board call ran long. "Eat without me. Love you." She'd stared at the plate until the rice went cold, then carried it to the kitchen and scraped it into the bin herself, because even now, with more money than most countries' treasuries, she couldn't bear to let the staff see her throw away food her son hadn't touched. Felt like throwing away something else. Emeka Adeyemi was 34 years old. He ran a technology company that had made him one of the wealthiest men in the country before he turned 30. He could buy a building in an afternoon and forget he owned it by the following week. And he was, by every measure Grace cared about, desperately alone. She had watched him grow harder each year since his father died, watched the women who orbited him grow more polished and more hollow, watched him stop bringing anyone home at all because bringing someone home meant risking that they wanted the house more than they wanted him. She had tried matchmaking dinners. He'd sat through them like a man enduring a medical procedure. She had tried introducing him to daughters of old friends. He'd been polite and empty and gone within the hour. So Grace had done something that, if her late husband could see her now, would have made him laugh until he cried. She had gone to her son's own company, applied for a cleaning position under a false name, and gotten the job, because nobody at Adeyemi Technologies looked twice at a cleaning application, and because the woman doing the hiring had no idea that the small, silver-haired applicant in front of her was the majority shareholder's mother. She told herself she was doing research. She told herself she wanted to see, with her own eyes and not through the filtered reports of assistants and board members, what kind of people surrounded her son every day. Who was kind to the people beneath them and who wasn't. Because Grace had learned a hard truth in 71 years. You did not learn a person's character by watching how they behaved toward people who could do something for them. You learned it by watching how they behaved toward people who could not. She had not expected in her second week to be knocked to the floor by a mop and helped up by a girl in a maid's uniform who had nothing to gain from it at all. Ifioma Bello had been working at Adeyemi Technologies for 8 months, cleaning the executive floors 3 nights a week, and the lobby every morning before the building filled with people who would never learn her name. She was saving for nursing school. She kept a small notebook in her locker where she wrote down words she didn't know yet from the medical textbooks she read on the bus, and looked them up when she got home. She did not know that the older woman she'd helped off the marble floor that morning, the one with the sharp, watchful eyes that didn't quite match the rest of her tired posture, was quietly becoming the person most interested in her, out of everyone in the building. Over the following weeks, Grace found reasons to work near her. She learned that Ifeoma stayed late without being asked when an elderly security guard's knees gave him trouble on the stairs, carrying his equipment up for him without being seen doing it. She learned that Ifeoma gave half her lunch to a stray cat that lived behind the loading dock, every single day, rain or shine. She learned that when a junior employee spilled coffee across a report 5 minutes before a client meeting, it was Ifeoma who quietly reprinted it from a spare drive in the mailroom and left it on the desk before anyone noticed it had ever been ruined, expecting nothing, telling no one. And she learned, on a Tuesday evening when the offices had mostly emptied, that Ifeoma had a habit of sitting in the stairwell after her shift to eat a small dinner from home, because the break room made her feel like she was being watched by people who resented her being there at all. "You don't have to sit on the stairs," Grace said, lowering herself down beside her with the particular care of a woman whose knees had opinions about marble floors. Ifeoma smiled, moving her bag to make room. "Old habit. My mother used to say the best conversations in our house happened on the stairs. Everyone had somewhere to be, but nobody wanted to leave." "Tell me about her," Grace said, and meant it, and listened for 40 minutes while Ifeoma talked about a mother who had raised 4 children alone after her husband left, who had died 2 years ago from a heart that finally gave out after giving so much of itself to everyone else. Ifeoma didn't cry. She talked about her the way you talk about someone you're still proud of, not someone you're still grieving, though Grace suspected it was both. "What do you want?" Grace asked her. "When the nursing degree is finished. Really want. Not what you think you're supposed to want." Ifeoma considered the question longer than most people would have. "I want to walk into a room and know I make it better just by being in it. I already believe that's true of nursing. I'd like to believe it's true of me too, in every room. Not just the ones I'm paid to clean." Grace went home that night and sat for a long time in the quiet of a house too big for one woman, and thought about a girl who mopped floors and fed stray cats and had never once, in 8 months, asked a single question about the Adeyemi family or shown the slightest curiosity about the wealth she cleaned around every single day. The first real complication arrived on a Thursday, when Emeka decided, against every instinct that had kept him sane for the last 5 years, to work late in his own office instead of sending everything through his assistant. He was still there at 9 when the cleaning staff came through, and it was Ifeoma who knocked lightly on his open door. "I can come back," she said, "if you're not finished." He looked up, and something in him, some tired, guarded part of him that had learned to expect flattery or nervousness or calculation from every new face that entered a room, noted that she looked at him the way she might look at anyone. Not the way people usually looked at Emeka Adeyemi. "No, go ahead," he said. "I'm just staring at the same paragraph. Won't bother you." She cleaned around him without making it a performance, without the careful, watchful efficiency of someone trying to be noticed, and when she reached his bookshelf she paused at a photograph of his father, dead 9 years now, standing beside a much younger Emeka in front of the company's first tiny office. "He looks proud," she said simply, and kept dusting. "He never got to see what it became," Emeka said, before he could decide whether he wanted to say it at all. Maybe he didn't need to. Looks like he already knew. It was such a small exchange. 11 sentences, maybe 12. But Emeka thought about it on the drive home, which was unusual, because he did not typically think about anything that happened in his office once he left the building. He mentioned it to no one. He told himself it was nothing. He mentioned it, in fact, only once. 3 days later, over the dinner he actually showed up for, to his mother, who set down her fork very carefully and asked, in a voice that gave away nothing at all, "What was her name?" "I don't know," Emeka admitted. "I didn't ask." Grace looked at her son for a long moment and thought, "Of course you didn't. You've spent 5 years training yourself not to ask." The lie could not hold forever, and Grace had known that from the beginning. It began to come apart on the afternoon the real trouble started. The afternoon the 3 women from the lobby, the ones who'd laughed at Grace on the floor, decided that a missing bracelet from the finance director's office was the perfect opportunity to solve a problem that had nothing to do with jewelry. "It was the new girl," one of them told security, loudly enough for half the floor to hear. "The maid, Fioma. She was in there yesterday." It was a lie, and not even a clever one. The bracelet turned up 2 days later in the finance director's own gym bag, exactly where she'd left it. But lies about people who clean up after you spread faster than truths about people who don't need defending. By the time security called Fioma in for questioning, half the office had already decided what they believed, because it was easier to believe a poor girl had stolen something than to imagine one of their own had simply misplaced it. Grace watched it happen from the supply closet where she was restocking paper towels, and felt something in her chest go cold and very still, the way it used to go when Emeka's father was alive and she watched injustice happen to someone who had no one standing behind them. She did something she had promised herself, going into this whole strange plan, that she would not do until she absolutely had to. She walked into her son's office without an appointment, still in her cleaning uniform, and told the assistant guarding his door that Mr. Adeyemi needed to see her immediately regarding a security matter. Emeka looked up, confused to see the same quiet cleaning woman from the stairwell stories, his mother. "No, wait." He looked again. "Mum." "Sit down," Grace said, in the voice she'd used on him since he was 6 years old, and it had never once failed to make him sit down. "I have about 4 minutes to explain something, and then you are going to fix what's happening on the 3rd floor, and then we are going to have a much longer conversation at home." The truth came out in pieces, the way truth usually does when someone has spent a month building a careful structure of small deceptions for what she believed was a good reason. Grace explained the job, the false name, the weeks of watching. Not spying, she insisted, though Emeka wasn't entirely convinced there was a difference. She explained why. She was careful even now not to say Ifeoma's name with any particular weight, though her son noticed anyway, because he had spent his whole life learning to read the things his mother didn't say. "You did this," Emeka said slowly, "to find me a wife." "I did this," Grace corrected, "to see who you actually are when you think no one important is watching. And I found out something I didn't expect. Found out who she is. What you do with that is entirely your business, Emeka. I'm not choosing anyone for you. I gave up that right when you turned 25 and I watched you fall in love with your work instead of a person. And I decided a mother's job was not to choose but to make sure her son was paying attention to the right things. That's all I did. And the bracelet is currently sitting in Deborah Okafor's gym bag, which security is confirming right now, because I told them exactly where to look, because I have spent a month learning where everything in this building actually goes." Grace stood, smoothing down an apron that had cost more in dignity than any dress she owned. "Fix it publicly, Emeka. Not quietly." She was accused in front of people. She deserves to be cleared in front of the same people. He did it himself, which surprised everyone, including Ifeoma, who was called not to a quiet HR office but to the 3rd floor conference room, where a dozen people had gathered under the pretense of an unrelated meeting that Emeka had engineered specifically so this correction would have witnesses. "There was an error yesterday," he said, standing at the head of the table he almost never used for anything but board meetings. "An accusation was made against a member of our cleaning staff, Miss Bello, based on nothing but proximity and assumption. The bracelet in question has been located exactly where its owner left it, in her own belongings. I want to be very clear in front of everyone here that Miss Bello did nothing wrong, and that the person who made this accusation did something that will be addressed separately and privately. Deborah Okafor's face went the color of the marble floor. Ifeoma stood very still, hands folded in front of her apron, and said nothing at all, because there was nothing dignified to say to a room that had believed the worst of her 24 hours ago and now watched her like she might make a scene about it. Emeka found her afterward in the stairwell, because he had noticed over these last strange weeks that it was where she went when she needed a minute that belonged only to her. "I should have asked your name the first time," he said. "That night in my office." "You know it now," Ifeoma said, careful, unreadable. "I know a lot more than your name now, actually. I know you fed a stray cat every day for 8 months and told no one. I know you reprinted a report for someone who never thanked you for it. I know you sat on the stairs with my mother for a month and told her things about your own mother that I don't think you've told most people." He sat down on the step below her, the way he'd never once, in 9 years of running this company, sat down on a step in this building. "I know she loved you a little bit before I even had a real conversation with you. And my mother does not love easily, so that's not nothing to me." Ifeoma studied him for a long moment, the way she'd studied Grace on the marble floor weeks ago. Not impressed, not intimidated, just looking honestly at what was actually in front of her. "Your mother pretended to be a cleaner for a month to spy on your company," she said finally. "Yes. That's insane. Yes. I'm going to need a lot more than one conversation on a stairwell before I decide what I think about any of this," Ifeoma said. But she didn't get up, and neither did he. And they sat there a while longer, on steps that belonged to no one and everyone, while the building slowly emptied around them. It did not become simple after that. Grace insisted more than once that she had never meant to arrange anything, and mostly this was true. She had gone looking for a mirror, not a matchmaking scheme, and it was only the accident of who happened to be standing in the reflection that made it look, from the outside, like fate rather than coincidence. Ifeoma took the nursing exam she'd been studying for on the bus, and passed them, and told Emeka about it before she told almost anyone else, not because she needed his approval, but because somewhere in those months he had become someone whose pride in her mattered. She never took his money. That was the detail Grace found herself telling her friends about, months later, with a fierceness that surprised even her. That the girl had turned down an apartment, a car, a scholarship offered outright, had insisted on earning her own way through school even after everyone knew exactly who she was and exactly what she'd have access to if she simply said yes to being taken care of. "I didn't clean floors for 8 months to end up someone's charity," Ifeoma told Grace once, over tea, in the kitchen of the house Grace had once eaten cold jollof rice alone in. "I'll take his company. I won't take his rescue." Grace laughed, really laughed, for the first time in longer than she wanted to admit, and thought that whatever happened next between her son and this girl who'd once helped a stranger off a marble floor for nothing at all, she had gotten exactly what she came looking for. Not a wife for Emeka. A reason to believe there were still people in the world who were kind when no one was keeping score. Emeka married her 18 months later, in a small ceremony neither of them wanted turned into a spectacle, and at the small reception afterward, Grace stood on the same lobby floor where she had once fallen with a mop in her hands, and watched her son laugh. Really laugh, not the practiced version he'd performed for boardrooms for a decade, and thought that some investments, the ones you can't put on a balance sheet, are the only ones that ever actually pay you back.